Welcome back to Burbs Listens. This is Finn and Marty. Today we are reviewing Mac Miller's re-release of Faces on streaming services. We actually got the triple LP vinyl.
We got one in, two. We got
in.
another one on the way for me and Finn. We had to get separate ones.
Just because we knew we were gonna want these in the future.
Yeah, definitely.
Let's hop right in.
In 2014, Mac Miller's Faces came out as a mixtape for free. A lot of people consider it one of the most personal Mac Miller albums. There's actually a short film that just released with it that came out just recently, as it recently came out into streaming services. But in 2014, I remember when this first came out, I actually didn't really listen to it. I only listened to like Rain and New Faces, like the top songs, Diablo and stuff like that, and like the songs that were really popular. I never really gave the full album until we did our Burbs albums of the mixtapes of the decade where we reviewed it, and then I'm like, I should probably listen to the full thing, and I absolutely adored it and haven't gone back since. But Faces has always been a project to me that it's ever since I listened to it fully, and even the singles of it, that's always been really personal and one of the Mac Miller I've always really liked about it. I've always just loved his music. I loved this idea of this album, and I just love Faces in general. It's always been something big to me. How's it been to you? What would you say?
Yeah, I would agree upon that. I think this album spans the furthest on both polarizing sides. Like it is his album that shows the true highs of his life, and it also is the first album that really goes into those dark paths of his life, like hard drug use.
Yeah.
The actual depression that he faces in his life and the hardships that he faces, which I feel like prior to this, we get a little in watching movies.
And Macadelic.
Even. But I feel like this is the first one that really goes deep into that and even uses like things like samples. Not necessarily the musical samples, but even like movie samples.
Yeah, I actually have a few, like the Bill Murray and Meatballs, which is in It Just Doesn't Matter. That's the one that really dominates me. Because it starts off that whole song and you're like kind of getting like an angst as an organ plays and going through that. And even the LaWanda Page sample in Wedding is great, where like and there's a bunch of different samples and like little just clips of like where kind of I goes in this idea of faces and how you have these multiple faces of people talking and just despair that you feel.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and that's exactly what I was trying to say. It spans every single face that Mac Miller has in his life. I think you put that absolutely.
And that's why a lot of people say, as I kind of mentioned before, the most personal album Mac Miller's ever had. And the one other thing that this album that I really want to touch on real quick is how much foreshadowing of his death through the lyric. One of the eeriest listens I've had in a while. I went and I re-listened to it once the came back streaming services. I'm like, I have to, this time and coming up for this review. And I just wrote down a few. Literally, I was just going through that just came to my head. I wrote. You could have picked. An encyclopedia worth of these quotes, but I might die before I detox. Kill me now if I do it all before hip hop Malibu. Yeah, no fucks when I go nuts. I give no fucks when I go nuts because I smoke dust, overdose on a sofa, polo jeans. Doing drugs is just a war with boredom, but they're sure to get to me. Funeral, which is a song that you could talk about
do a whole review on that.
Foreshadows his death. And suppose I'll die alone from an overdose of some sort, San Francisco. And that's just few of the quotes. That's one just picked out that I typed up when I was listening to the album. So many quotes. It's so sad to see that he's predicting his death. And obviously, this album is completely focused on drug use and drug addiction and drug abuse. And it's like and so you're obviously going to see those themes to do it, but just seeing the quotes and then knowing that he died of an overdose just 6 years after, I think it's 4 or 5 years after this record is absolutely devastating. It's one of the hardest things I've had to listen to, and it's just when you hear it, you're like, how much pain Mac was in, but it's like it's hard to. It's just so hard to see and stuff like that, and there's just so much to it, going in. But I would say there's just so many of those quotes and so many of the different themes, and those instrumentals kind of play into that.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I think one of the most personal and deep lines was like, trapped inside these dreams of mine, so you'll never get a piece of mine.
There's just so many of those type of quotes that that make you feel that way and stuff like that, and it's just so hard to listen to it over and over again, and it's such a great piece of music, and there's so many different great parts about it, but it's just so hard to listen to it rather than do it. One other thing that I think I wanted to also touch on is how do you like the features on this project?
The features, What do you got? You got Schoolboy Q, Earl Twice, Dash,
You got
Vince Staples, Rick Ross. I mean, honestly, I didn't think there was a poor feature on here.
Yeah, no.
I don't think there was a poor feature, but were these necessarily outside of Earl Sweatshirt and Vince Staples, these weren't really minds that I expected to be on a project like this. Am I right? Like, going down that more of a depressive side of life, I wouldn't think of a Rick Ross or Schoolboy Q feature.
Yeah.
So I think it was definitely more interesting, but I guess they kind of had the more hyper sides of the album, a more, like I said prior, a very versatile album. And I think Rick Ross and Schoolboy Q and Dash were people that provided that versatility.
Yes. Yeah.
And then having Earl Sweatshirt on New Faces, V2, and Polo Jeans, you were able to get that deeper, depressive side of things, as Earl does in most of his music.
And this was, 2 years, I mean, this was only a year before I Don't Like Shit, I Don't Go Outside. So, and you kind of see him transitioning, especially in his features with watching the movie, watching movies sound off. And these type of features with Mac Miller, even on his first project, Door's Guide, you see these Earl and Mac are both kind of transitioning. They kind of met at a sort of period where they both were kind of going in the same artistic direction, and it kind of just worked out the best because they literally it seemed like they were on different sides of the spectrum, going as like a frat. Mac Miller's like a frat rapper, what I mean? Earl Sweatshirt is young poet lyricist who's really up and coming, talks about a lot of taboo topics. Then they started going to more depressive route,
and it's sad that it came that way, but they met in their most.
But that's, I guess it's one thing is like with art, when you have such great art like that, it's something that will always stay with it. They going through and hearing those types of connection, it felt like that. This is just like a collection of emotions rather than anything else, and him connecting each emotion to each different feature really, I think, really matched really well to it, and him being able to connect these emotions to these features, I thought did really well. Like he had the Rick Ross one is kind of a beat I would never really necessarily see Rick Ross on, but him transitioning, being like, hey, you're gonna come to this mindset, I'm in this mindset, let's make this together and figure out something, and it's phenomenal to see how he's able to get these features and stuff like that to work together. And people like Vince Staples, who's kind of known as not really like a prophet in a sense, as a rapper, like saying something, and I'm nothing against Vince Staples, and that wasn't even anything at this point. He's not gonna like create anything like thematical or anything like that, but this verse on Therapy, I think, was more like he was acting as a prophet, talking more philosophical or something like that, and it's something that I would never see, in him connecting through that I thought was a beautiful thing to do. So I thought that him connecting those features was something pretty cool to do. And I think another thing I wanted to touch on is I realized that Mac Miller we kind of saw towards the tail end of his career, he's more brought into like singing ideas and more of singing through on tracks and stuff like that. But this album, I think, shows that he's a wordsmith at heart. And obviously, you can see him experimenting with vocals, especially through the chorus and stuff.
I was gonna say, there's a lot of melodies in here that I wrote down personally. Holy smokes! I did not expect Mac Miller. He doesn't I guess in Divine Feminine and Swimming a little more. He has those vocal
and Circles especially.
Circles especially. You can see a lot more of the vocal side of him, but I think you're absolutely right. He proved in every single song. He only had a few songs that really utilized a melody-driven song or melody-driven track. But in every single song, like you're saying, he is a wordsmith. He came through what's some of the hottest lyrics that I've expected out of Mac Miller, or that you'd see out of Mac Miller.
Yeah, it's just like it's not even just one-liners. It's just like how he can double entendres and being able to talk, and as we were talking about Predict the Future, being able to like just do crazy different things with lyrics that I never thought that, and to be able to like jumble these different words and phrases into one and connecting is something that's like expertise. And you realize that Mac Miller is so much more than just a rapper but an artist, and even though obviously rapping is the component of lyricism and that is such a heavy emphasis on it, but you could see that with his craft, it's like poetry in a sense. It's not just rapping. Like it is something beautiful to listen to and just like and go with it, and to see that is something like his wordsmith ability. But then we also see him tackle those, as we were talking about, melodies and the chorus. I definitely see in the choruses most. Like some of the catchiest choruses I've ever seen, like in Happy Birthday is a really good one and stuff. And I think there's a good one in Therapy, and I think that it was pretty good. And with this wordsmith, it's incredible to watch, you know, and to see that. And like being able to see that is just so beautiful. I would say if I was going to put like a pinpoint theme to this album, I would kind of say he builds like a Hotel California in a sense, because Hotel California is so like you could see with some of his more hyper songs like Here We Go on the track and stuff like that. We can see like he's in the highest of the highs, you know, when you're reaching on those highs, but then you see the lowest of the lows, and it's kind of like making this like utopia / dystopia.
Right. Yeah. No, I think
drug abuse.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an incredibly polar opposite side of an album. There's so many different songs that go to either side of the pole.
Yeah.
There's not. It's either you're having a super hype song and you're on that incredible high, you're having the time of your life, or it's going through, this is terrible, like, let me express my emotions, what's going on in me.
Yeah.
Absolutely right.
But yet, even with those polars, they're all connected in one. You know what I'm saying?
Oh,
Like,
absolutely.
which is crazy. Like, which is crazy. You can see a song that has such a hype up horn, like the distorted horn or something like that, and then something with a really sad organ that like kind of gives you eerie. But yet, they have this like similar form as Plato, I would say. Like they're all have a collective like a collectiveness together, and even when you have the highs of the highs and the lows of the lows, they all have this similar base of being able to connect in some way.
And I think that goes back to that exact point that you brought up earlier. It's all these different faces that Mac Miller has throughout his entire life, but it's all still Mac Miller. Absolutely.
That you're totally right with that being like you would see the different. He's wearing like a mask in so many different. Like ways to go, and there's so many different graphics of like someone holding up a mask when you talk about Mac Miller and stuff like that, and him holding up his different masks at different areas where he's at in his life, and it's just something. It's crazy to see that like he's able to utilize all of these different emotions and different feelings together. So it's bittersweet listening to the project. I think
bittersweet is the perfect word
because you know you love hearing and you're like, oh my god, this art is so phenomenal, but the only way to create this art eventually led to his death,
right?
In a sense, like if you really think about that, and it's like, and when you hear people talk about addiction, you hear, especially through music, stuff like that, you hope that eventually at one point they'll get clean. You kind of have this optimism, even though when they're creating this art, you selfishly like indulge in it and keep kind of supporting it, but at the same time, and you hope at the back of your mind that they'll be able to create without these drugs and stuff like that. And I know Mac Miller could have, obviously, because he's a fantastic artist, but it's really just sad to see the path that it went down, you know, and this us like indulging in this art, you could like, semi led to his death in a sense. Yeah. Which is just like, I know it's a horrible way to put it. I don't want to put that in like anyone, but it's just so but just his art was beautiful, and that's the bittersweetness part of it. Yeah,
it's not an album that you're gonna go around listening to in your car and just going crazy to. It's an album that I listen to solo with my headphones on and could have my own space.
Yeah, true. And like, there's some songs, obviously, as we talked about the highs, you could just maybe throw on a party and stuff. But like, you can. I don't like doing that anymore. I was alone in my bed just listening to it. Like that was the best way I think I like to do it and stuff. And I think this is my favorite Mac Miller project. I would have to say it is. I love it to death. I think there's so many good albums and mixtapes and whatever that Mac Miller's made, but I think this has to be the favorite. You know, it's like and I would say the quote is like, so many things that I created, but this right here might be my favorite. I think the most definite part where you have to analyze where you're like, that's Mac right there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this encapsulated every single part of music that he got to, whether it's Good AM, encapsulated parts of Good AM, Swimming, Circles, even Blue Slide Park and some of his songs. Oh, yeah. It was everything. And I think that's what it's in my top 3 best Mac Miller albums of all time, or projects of all time. And I'd put it as in a top 3 favorite of all time for myself as well. It is just unbelievable how many different parts it touches.
Yeah, it's not just my favorite Mac Miller too. It's my favorite one of my favorite records of all time. I just can't listen to it. I had to get the vinyl. I spent way too much money on it, but I wouldn't have done it. It could have been $300. I would have spent the same amount of money. So it was worth it.
We'll see you guys next time on the next Burbs Listens. I'm Finn.
I'm Marty.
Peace.